Hello, my name is Mike Daniels from the Behavioural Architects in Australia, and I'd like to say good morning, good evening, wherever you are when you're watching this short presentation. And first of all, just to say thank you to Anna Ziba and the team at Warwick Behavioural Insights team for inviting me to share, I guess, thoughts on how we approach behavioural science and applying behavioural science here in work that we do in Australia. And I'm not sure if there might be kind of cultural differences that you're able to notice in the way that we do things, but I felt it might be a useful thing to do to show how we have tackled kind of interesting challenges in transport, in helping people better navigate transport for the better design of physical spaces. But I want to show how we tackle that using behavioural science to both better understand behaviour and then actually make recommendations for actionability, because I think one of the things that I have found is in quite a long career is that one of the worst things in the world is to be told something really, really interesting and then think, okay, how do I apply that? And so what we're trying to do with the work that we do at the Behavioural Architects is to work with our clients to make it clear what they need to do in order to influence behaviour to achieve those positive outcomes that they're looking for. So I hope in this you're going to see a snapshot of insight that'll be interesting, but also crucially that actually moves forward into actionability and things that you can do as a result. Before I dive into the presentation per se, I might just give a brief introduction to myself and the Behavioural Architects. I'm the founder of the Behavioural Architects in Australia, and my partners globally, based in the UK and in China. We all started our business roughly at the same time. The UK office started first in 2012, and we have offices in London and Oxford, then China later in 2012 in Shanghai, and then Sydney in 2013. So now we have additional offices in Melbourne in Australia, also in New York, and we've also started working in New Zealand as well, from based out of our team here in this part of the world. So our work essentially is about using behavioural science at the very centre of what we do to better understand and subsequently to change behaviour. So I'm thrilled actually to kind of give you to share some of the work that we've been doing with our clients in the transport space here in Australia. And if I can just share screens at this point, using Zoom here to record my presentation. Okay. So what I'd like to talk to you about is designing the future transport environment for the fallible human. And kind of quite consciously chose that title for this presentation because a lot of the time when we've looked at systems, we've looked at contexts and environments that have been designed, sometimes not designed as well, what we've seen is a kind of a thought pattern and behavior from organizations that, kind of follows this line, that the feeling that we have to teach people to use the system, that we have to provide education to them to use the system, which actually chances are it's got, low possibilities of success. Far better to accept, in a sense, this characterization that we have of the fallible human, the human that has been identified as by behavioral science as taking shortcuts that often serve but sometimes mislead, but understanding what constitutes, in a sense, really not human fallibility, but human normality, and making sure that we design environments for that. So these are about guidelines. These are behavioral science guidelines to help people navigate better in transport contexts. And this is a very important thing at the moment here in Australia for a number of reasons that I'll go into, but let me give you a picture, first of all, of what I would like to cover. So I want to explore, firstly, in this short presentation, why future transport environments actually really need to be built for the fallible human. before then providing 3 clues from behavioural research, and I'll talk in a little bit of detail about that research and how to do it, on how to better design transport environments. And then lastly, because what is so important in behavioural work is actionability, I'll share with you 4 guiding principles for future transport environment design. Bit of context. It's estimated by 2030 that Australia's population is going to be 30 million. It may not seem a lot from a UK perspective, or indeed from some of the other countries that I'm sure people are dialing in from to see this. But here in Australia, we have a very, very heavily urbanised population, with 80% of the population, more than 80% of the population living in the big cities. So this will be a big deal for this country. Personal space, clearly, will be at a premium as a result of this population growth. People are going to have to navigate larger and larger crowds in spaces. And with that, design of the physical environment becomes ever more important. It seems too that, with this kind of growth in population, issues in the transport environment are really only going to exacerbate in the future. Wayfinding queues, such as they are likely to become increasingly more invisible. People's efficiency in movement in getting around the place is likely to be reduced, and particularly what we've seen in the last year with COVID is the health and safety factors that again will be exacerbated as more and more people come into closer and closer contact. And then finally, from a transport point of view and a transport network point of view, a phenomenon of the world of transport is that tiny delays, perhaps of people getting on and off trains in one location, can multiply and butterfly effect, so to speak, into really quite significant disruptions on the network as a whole. So being able to actually design environments to make transfer between services and movement through stations and so on as seamless as possible can have a very, very important effect on the overall experience and efficiency of the system. So the question here is, how do we design more effective transport environments for the future? And to do this, and our starting point to understand current contexts of behaviour, we use behavioural research. And there's 2 particular methodologies that I'll call out here. So we conducted contextual observations and eye tracking, mobile eye tracking research. Contextual observations are essentially, people such as myself, with behavioural science expertise, who look into a context or an environment and sort of decode it, looking through a lens of behavioural science to see what might be a trigger for a particular behaviour or indeed a barrier. In some ways, I like to think of that kind of analysis as being sort of decoding the stage upon which behaviour is acted, and the shape and the manner and the props that are on that stage greatly influence the performance of the actor ourselves. So contextual observations done with a behavioural science lens. The second technique that we use is called mobile eye tracking, and this is a very, very powerful approach. We give people glasses that they're not too much bigger than the ones that I've just put on here, and they have cameras in them. They have a recording pack that's attached at the back by a wire, and you can send people on missions moving through space. And what these eyeglasses do, this mobile tracking does, is that it records field of view, and then the camera pointing back the other way records pupil movement. So they're very finely calibrated so that when we watch video playback, we can see someone's view as they're moving through a space. And very critically, we can see 2 things. We can see what they're specifically paying attention to, and this is intriguing, equally importantly, what they are not paying attention to that otherwise we might expect them to. It's important when doing this kind of research to kind of look at both sides of that coin, not what people are looking at or only what people are looking at, but also what they're not looking at too. So why would we use these kinds of techniques rather than just asking people? Well, the field of behavioural science has shown, I think, that just, people are just not very good at explaining their own behavior. They'll give lots and lots of reasons why, or kind of quite convincing and packaged stories, but they may be misleading. We don't, as humans, have great insight into really what influences our behavior. So as behavioural architects, we tend not to ask people to explain their own behaviour in interview situations. We place much more emphasis on observing behaviour in context and using things like eye tracking to see what people are really paying attention to. So there are three key insights that we learned from this behavioural research. The first is that people are highly habitual in what they do. So most journeys that people take are not journeys for the first time, rather they're journeys that I made yesterday or the day before. So the majority of journeys are habitual. And with that, because they're habitual, because the behaviour is ingrained, people are not paying attention. Key. Secondly, we saw from this research that when it comes to how to navigate way around, people's first clue that they look for, we learned, was physical structures. So, and I give you a little bit of context for this particular study that we did was exploring how to get people to exit stations using lifts rather than escalators, particularly when they have heavy luggage. And so we sent people with big bags, big suitcases and the like on missions using eye tracking, saying, okay, get out of this environment. It's almost like I'm a celebrity, get me out of here. But looking at the eye tracking video playback afterwards, we were able to see what they paid attention to, places that they'd not been to before. And we saw that they placed their gaze go much more to physical structures than to signs, a little bit to what other people are doing, but physical structures are really, really important. I'm looking for the stairs, I'm looking for the lifts, so that catches their eye. We also saw as well from this research, and this characterizes, I think, quite a lot of transport environments, is that a cluttered context leads to inattention. When we're kind of overwhelmed by things, we kind of zone out a little bit. So let's explore a little bit more about this. And the first piece about people being highly habitual and often not paying a lot of attention. So transport behaviours, as I was saying, highly habitual. They're often journeys that people have been on before, and the behaviour occurs often in response to a kind of a trigger or a cue that is kind of often driven by something that's kind of subconsciously processed. And people are rewarded for the success of that behaviour. So we're operating really, and this is an important thing here, we're operating in an environment where people aren't paying a lot of attention to their surroundings. If you like, conscious attention is the exception rather than the rule. So people are relying on familiar shortcuts to help them navigate. Now, one of the kind of key implications for us and the way that we kind of think about behavioural change is that so often it can be easier, in a sense, to kind of work with the grain of behaviour rather than to sort of work against it and cut it off completely. So it's important to take that kind of baseline and that context of understanding when we're thinking about design. I mentioned that people rely more heavily on physical structures to navigate than they do signage itself. And to explore this in a bit more detail, here you can see some escalators from exiting a station, big yellow, kind of highly visible, bars there. This attracts the eye, and people predominantly, when they're kind of in an unfamiliar space, the meaning that they're looking for is more readily available often in physical structures than it is in anything else. You kind of know what a lift looks like. And for anyone who's got a background in the psychology of perception and potentially the work of James Gibson a number of years back, this is like the theory of affordances, where, in a sense, the meaning of objects is kind of, in a sense, kind of present in their structure and the way that we kind of visually process things. So we're in system 1 most of the time, everyone knows what system is, and we don't invest additional effort to figure things out, to interpret written signage. It's cognitively difficult, or certainly more cognitively straining than the cues that are available from physical structures. So for us, a key point here is that it's insufficient really to rely excuse me, on wayfinding signage to help people navigate. Physical structures are more salient and much easier to spot against a crowd. And then cluttered contexts leading to inattention here. We've got a couple of photographs that you can see on the side of the screen here. One showing a cluttered context, lots going on, and the other a more sparse context with less going on, where the signage is clearer, the behavioural cues are much, much clearer to people. So one of the issues here is that new signage and other cues are often developed in studios, in isolation potentially, without consideration of how they interact with what's already in that environment. So they just become another piece of clutter, another sticker sort of put on top. And this creates a multitude of overwhelming cues and ends up really just, competing for attention, but also blocking attention as well, with nothing in particular standing out. So we think this is an important thing. Always give very careful consideration to how signs and cues interact with each other, but also what's already in the environment. And if you can, try to design an uncluttered context. So using these kind of fundamental building blocks of insights, we developed 4 guidelines for more behaviourally effective transport environment design. Firstly, making the desired choice the easiest and most salient option. Secondly, opting for visual cues over worded instruction. Thirdly, borrowing cues from existing and familiar contexts. And lastly, fourthly, create a sparse environment to give important instructions more salience. So let's look first of all about how you make that desired choice the easiest or the most salient. And often in physical design, there is a preferred choice that we want people to make. Take the stairs, take the lifts, take the escalators, one of the 3. But what's important is to make that desired choice as easy as possible, the easiest option to take, and also that is most salient, and make it the most salient. And this example we actually took from Germany. So during, as part of an Olympic Games bid, I understand that train stations kind of were given this kind of look of a kind of an athletics track to encourage more active movement. Secondly, opting for visual cues over worded instruction. So in Sydney, this is a project that we worked on with Transport for New South Wales to minimise dwell time on platforms and overcrowding on platforms as well. And you can see there called out in that circle, keep left on stairs and ramps. And one of the big causes of delay in Sydney was that there'd be this sort of meandering together of people coming up and coming down. And one of the designs that we made from the behavioural architects was, as you see there, showing arrows on the left going up and arrows on the right going down. And this led to a reduction, which is extraordinary, of the number of people going up or down the wrong side of the stairs. It reduced by up to 78%. And we analysed that in a randomised controlled trial prior to the rollout of this signage system throughout Sydney. But here, the kind of key thing is that this visual, symbolic cues are interpreted much, much faster with far greater precision than the cognitively straining written instructions. Borrowing cues from existing and familiar contexts, talking about working with the grain of behaviour, it's not necessary to always introduce new systems and codes. Why not use what people are already familiar with, like traffic lights, for example. So again, on this project where we're reducing dwell time on platforms, what you see there on the right is the sign above on the platform that tells you when the next service is coming in. And what you see there is the number of underneath the sign, which is T1 central, which is the destination and the line. You see there the number of carriages on the train, and then the colour of traffic lights indicating the best place to get a seat. So you'll see that right at the front and the third carriage back, that's red, they're full. So don't queue in that part of the station. The orange one at 5, there's a bit of room there, but really the green ones are where you need to be looking if you want a seat. And this encourages people to disperse throughout the platform to reduce the amount of delay that can occur. So these are heuristics and rules of thumb that we put into practice, but borrowed them from other areas. They're familiar, low effort to interpret and understand what they mean, and resulting in much more efficient decision making. So this was, again, it's been something that's rolled out across the Sydney region. And then lastly, utilising a sparse context to increase salience. The condition of salience really is something in relation to other things in its immediate environment, and something stands out more in a sense in relation, if you maximize the difference between what you want people to pay attention to and everything else, you're going to get the largest possible differentiation if you have a sparse environment, and the thing that you want people to pay attention to is the only thing in that environment. So rather than filling a transport environment with lots of wayfinding signage and instruction, which can lead and promote inattentional blindness, embrace a sparser space, removing unnecessary distraction and focusing on the key instructions or behaviours and making them salient and much more likely to be followed. So a new train line that's being built here in Sydney is called the Sydney Metro. And the context we have advised to be incredibly sparse and relying on minimal signage or instruction, but building into the environment quite clear and salient instructions. And there, as you see, just on the right-hand side, a very minimalistic indication of where to stand to get on a train, because people will be coming off via those green arrows in the middle. So just to summarize a little bit then, so if you want to help people navigate better in more crowded environments and navigate through space more seamlessly, make desired choices easier and most salient, opt for visual cues over worded instruction, borrow cues from existing and familiar contexts, and create a sparse environment to give important instructions more salience. I hope that's been helpful, and I hope that's been of interest. And if you want to find out more about how we think and work at the Behavioural Architects in Australia, then we have this, you can follow us on Instagram, or indeed visit our website, which is www.bearchitects.com, where you'll find out more about our global offering as well. But be delighted to hear from anyone who has questions. And thank you very much for your time in hearing what I have to say. Thank you.